So what we'll do is, again, we'll be using this item pool for this. So the chat window. So all of you can open this link, and again reminding you, in place of your name, you have to type your roll number. Once you are done with that, I'll open the first question, which will ask you to summarize the last lecture. So you can summarize it in your own words. You can also refer to the slides. I think I have emailed the slides of last lecture to all of you. Okay, you can go ahead and start filling it. So I'm giving you 2 to 3 minutes to look at the last lecture and briefly summarize it so that all of us are at the right place. I'm happy to see that someone has started recording. Thanks. So your response to this question, it will be a component in grading, though a very small component. So a few people who will summarize the lecture best, I'll give them some bonus points in the continuous evaluation part. Okay, can one of you also type your response in the chat window? Any one of you about what we did in the last lecture? Maybe many of you can do that, not just one. Okay, how many of you started reading the book? So in the last lecture, I told you that we are on the first page of both the books, be it Galvin or Tannenbaum. Did anyone read that? If yes, you can type a +1 in the chat window. So I want all of you to get into this habit of reading textbooks and not totally rely on the lectures. You learn a whole lot when you read the textbooks as opposed to learning the things from YouTube or even the lecture videos of your instructors. No one read the textbook? How many of you opened it to check that we are at the first page? Okay, so I'm closing the question at the item pool. Anyone needs more time? I'll take that as a no. Okay. So if you have opened your textbooks, this is the figure you will see. And from our first lecture, I hope that you'll understand quite a lot from this figure. So you will see same figure in Galvin, same figure in Tannenbaum, or same figure in any other PDF material if you are referring to it. So here the idea is whenever you purchase a computer or a laptop, we get both of these two things sort of pre-installed. So hardware definitely is a must. Sometimes you get operating systems pre-installed. Other times you can just get the hardware and install an operating system on your own. Installing Linux is easy because it's open source software these days. So now the thing is, if you do not have this operating system, you cannot directly talk to the hardware. That was what we were talking about in the previous lecture. So this operating system, so there we come to the first statement that operating system, it is acting as an interface between the user and the hardware. Rather, I'll say it's not an interface between the user and the hardware. Rather, it's an interface between the applications you are running on your system and the hardware. So whenever you open your computer, you know that you do not directly talk to the hardware. So you do not open your computer and talk to the wires there. And nor do you talk directly to the operating system. So most of the time, these are the application programs you talk to, and then these application programs, they can talk to the operating system. I request all of you to mute yourself. Okay. If you have a doubt, then definitely you can unmute and speak. Okay, so we talk to the application programs, and they are the ones who talk to the operating system on our behalf, and how that whole thing happens, that we'll study in this course. Now the idea is, if we talk about a car, like we were talking about, operating system gives us some kind of abstraction. So a car might have a single layer of abstraction, or maybe even two. So generally it's all the hardware which is hidden inside the floor, and then we are operating that. So maybe there is one layer of abstraction or two, but when you talk about a computer system, there are multiple level of abstractions. So we actually refer to them as views. So when you'll open this Galvin book, you will find different types of views there. So what are the views there? View is nothing but how different people look at a computer system. So you can divide the people in the world in various types. There are certain people who have never worked on a computer system. Maybe they have looked at a computer system, feels like a magic to them, but they haven't worked on it. So that is the first category of people who for us are outside the view as of now. Then comes the second category, which are the end users who sit somewhere over here. And I think all of us are end users, at least all of us who are there in this lecture, because we are working with a laptop or maybe with a mobile or an iPad. So end users are those people whose work is just to get their work done on the computer system. Right? So they just want convenience. They want an easy way to use the computer. Even if it's a bit slower, that's okay to them. So they are not very much concerned about efficiency, as you can see in this figure. So most of the people are end users, and they do not need any much of great insight into the computer. So as an example, if I'm working in a bank and I'm using a banking software, I don't have anything to do with how that software is working internally. I just want my work to be done and get back to my home. So those people, we call them the end users. So that's the first level of abstraction here. Now, these end users, they are using some applications. It can be a spreadsheet, it can be Excel, Microsoft Word, or maybe any specialized software which their bank or their company has provided to them. So we call them the application programs. That is the second layer of abstraction. When these people work on these application programs, now the question is, there is someone who would have designed these application programs, right? There would be someone who has designed spreadsheet for you, there would be someone who has designed Microsoft Word for you, and they would have designed it by writing some piece of code. How exactly? We should look at Google. So that second layer of people who develop these application programs, we call them the application programmers. Where do you think you people stand? I'll ask that question from you at the end. So we have the first kind of people who are end users, second kind of people who are application programmers. Let me ask it right away. So where do you think you stand? Is it one or two? You can type in the chat window. Are you the end users or are you the application programmers? So Mihika says two. Yes, that is correct. So most of you are application programmers. None of you are end users. Given that you have done a course in Introduction to Computing, you know how to write programs in C and Python. You can develop applications using, just give me a second. I'll just put my mobile on vibrate. Okay. Exactly. So most of you are in the second layer. So you can develop apps, maybe using Python, maybe using some other programming language or Android apps. All of you are there. And then as an application programmer, that's the second layer of abstraction. You don't even care much about how the program which you have written, how is it talking to the hardware. As an example, when you are writing a C program and you give a printf statement there, so do you care how exactly that printf statement is bringing that hello world back to your screen? Actually, no. And while writing that printf statement, do you need to care what kind of a monitor do you have? Which company's monitor is it? What kind of a mouse you have? Or which keyboard do you have? You need not care about all those hardware details. It's the operating system which takes care of that. So tomorrow, let's say I plug out the mouse of my computer and I plug in the mouse of some other company or some other brand, or I change my entire computer screen. Let's say it gets broken and I get it replaced. I don't need to care about running my C program. So I don't have to modify my C program so that it works with all kind of mouse, it works with all kind of screens. No. So I don't care about that. So what happens is this operating system, it provides certain kind of interfaces to the application programmers which they can directly use. So all of you can directly use the printf statement, scanf statement, list.append and all those things. What is happening beneath those and how they are talking to the hardware is mostly we are not concerned about that. And as we discussed, if you sit to write that printf function on your own, it will take you 4 years. So we generally do not do that. That was a problem in the initial days when operating system was coming and people started designing different kind of printers, different kind of monitors. Then there was this problem. The operating system or this code which was given to you, it would be initially written for a particular kind of a hardware, piece of hardware. And tomorrow, if you change that piece of hardware, let's say you bring some other mouse and plug it in your system, it won't work. So can any of you name which is that entity inside my system which allows me to access any kind of hardware device? There is a particular name for that. And I'm sure all of you would have
Device
heard about it.
drivers.
Exactly, it is device drivers. So device drivers, they are a part of operating system. It's a piece of software and it ensures that you can run your programs on literally any kind, with any kind of peripheral devices. So also device drivers, they are different than device controllers, which we'll talk about. Okay, so that was the second layer where we had the application programmers, then coming down to the third level. So when we are using these applications, they are accessing some other kind of code. So there comes a third layer of people who write code for operating systems, who build operating systems. We call them the system programmers. Do we have any system programmer here in the class? So system programmers, they have to take care of each kind of thing, how things are operating with hardware, how your programs are working, and they also have to ensure that hardware gets utilized in the best possible way. So this is the, okay. So as we can see, there is an abstraction inside abstraction inside abstraction when you talk about a computer system. And when you talk about this final layer, which is called hardware, as we'll discuss about it today, you will see it's again not that simple. Hardware is, so the hardware of our system, it is so complicatedly intertwined with each other. So there also you will see all the more level of abstractions. So we are going to talk about that. Before that, a few points we should discuss. So the first point is we have discovered the first goal of operating system, which is, what is that? Which we have been talking since the beginning of these classes. Can you name that in one word?
Abstraction.
Abstraction. Right, that is the first goal of operating system, that you need not worry about what's happening on the hardware level. It hides everything for you. Okay, what else does operating system do? Is that all? Is that all, converting the programs or the applications which I run into machine level language so that hardware can understand it? Or is there something more to the operating system? So for that, I want each of you to quickly press Control Alt Delete on your systems. I don't think any of your systems should get rebooted by that. It won't restart. It shouldn't happen. So just press Control Alt Delete and tell me what comes on your screen. Maybe one of you can also share your screen with us and show us what happens. If your system gets rebooted, you can join back the lecture. I'll allow you in. What do you see?
Task manager.
Task manager, right? Okay. So now can you ask this task manager, just surf it a little, and can each of you find out how many programs are running on your computer? So for me, there are a lot of things. I have my file explorer opened, and then my Chrome, and then MS Teams, and then I was working with some Excel. All those things are open, but all of us know what all we have opened, but I want you to see what your task manager says, how many things are open. And then you can go
6 apps and 112 background processes.
6 apps and 100 background processes. Okay, anyone else? So you can go to the item pool window again and give your answer there. So how many programs are running? So in the previous days, what would happen if you press this Control Alt Delete, it would reboot your system. So we were sort of always scared to use these three keys, and we'll use only in the case when the system was hung up indefinitely. Okay, Pulkit says he has 5 apps and 97 processes. So what is app? Application programs. Now, I have two things here, 5 apps and 97 processes. What is the difference between an app and a process? So let me share my screen and show my task manager to you. I hope you can see my screen. Okay. So this is how it looks like. So there are all the programs. It shows running to me. Okay, it hasn't categorized them. But see, for me, I am running only maybe at least 10 programs from my side, but my computer, it is running like hundreds or 200s of programs. And it does not call them programs, it calls them processes. So there comes our first question. Is a program and a process the same thing, and what is the difference between them? Right? If they were the same thing, why should we have two names for them? It looks like someone got rebooted. Okay. Other than that, let's ask a few more questions here. So for each of you, I guess there will be more than some 100 processes. And for now, let's assume program and process is the same thing. So 100 programs and 100 processes are running on your system. How many CPUs do you have? How many computing units do you have? So for me, it is, if I go here and check it, so my system is a 4-core system. So I actually have 4 computing units, or you can say my system itself has some 4 processors which can work together. I think it will be 4 for most of you. Previously, there used to be only 1 core or 1 processor in my system. Now the question is, let's say 4 cores, 4 processors and 200 processes. Right, so nearly like 50 processes for each processor. Now the question is, how is each processor running these 50 processes together? So one thing about your processors is your processor can do exactly one thing at a time. So if it is working on your Internet Explorer, it cannot at the same time run your, let's say, a song also. So how is this happening? Let me rephrase the question. So I have one processor, and this one processor is running 50 things together. But we also know that a processor cannot run things together. It can run only one thing at a time. So both these statements sound contradictory. What is happening there? At the one end, we are saying I am running 10 programs together. On the second hand, I am saying my processor can run only one program at a time. So what is wrong here? Anyone?
It does one after the other, but very quickly.
It does one after the other very quickly. So your processor, it's a very good juggler. So I hope you have sometimes in circus seen the people, they juggle things. So we can say that he is juggling 10 balls, but at one time his hand is in contact with just one ball. Same is the case with your processor. It does exactly one thing at a time, but as we have discussed, it can do like trillions of computations at a second. So no one can realize that it's doing all of them together. Every process feels like I'm the only one running. I think, and none of us even realize it. Assume that I'm working on a Microsoft Word document with a song running in the background. So actually, it's doing one at a time. It will run the song for a while, then it will come back to the Word document. Run the song for a while, come back to the Word document. But it happens so fast. I feel like my song is running continuously. I don't see a lapse there. So that is the one thing. So we'll talk about more about it in one of the chapters, how this happens. Let's look at a few more things here. So you see certain things here. When I open this task manager, so it has every piece of your hardware listed here. So you have CPU, you have memory, you have disk, network, GPU engine, and your power uses. Coming to the memory, similar to the processor, your system has only one memory. And then all of these processes, we'll talk about this, why your processes need memory or why your programs need memory. But the point is, all of your programs are using this memory. They actually reside in memory. It's like memory is like a home to them. They'll go there and sit there. That is another problem. Now, if all my programs are in the memory, they should not poke each other. So you would have seen, assume that you write a C program and how many of you have got segmentation fault at least once? If yes, you can type a +1 in the chat window. Okay, so definitely more than once. So what exactly is a segmentation fault?
I think from what I've read online or something, it describes that you're trying to access memory you're not allowed or permitted to.
Exactly. So we are accessing some memory which we are not allowed to permit. So most of the times you will see such errors only in C programming language, not in others. And in C it is the pointer. So that is one thing with C programming language, and that's why it's the first programming language which we teach to the computer science students. The reason is you can directly talk to the memory there, memory of your computer. So I hope you have done this exercise of declaring a variable in C and then looking at its address using printf %p address of that variable. So it will tell you where exactly is that variable present in your memory. No other programming language will allow you to do that, especially high level languages like Python and MATLAB, I'm not sure, but Python, no. Right. So if you have written a program and then and segmentation fault, mostly it will come when you are trying to write to a memory location, not read. So when you are trying to write, what is happening if somehow some other process is using that memory? Segmentation fault will not always come. It might be the case you run a program for one time, it will run. You run it for another time, the same program will throw a segmentation fault. Because maybe the first time you ran it, that memory location, it was not being used by any process. Now the second time you are running it and you are trying to write to that memory location, there is some other process present at that memory location and you are trying to access that. And operating system, it stops you from accessing that, giving you a segmentation fault. So if operating system wasn't there, we would have changed other processes and other programs, ultimately crashing our computer system. So that is the second thing which operating system does. Also, what is interesting about operating system is, let's assume that the size of your memory is some, let me call it in some units, let's say it's 10 units. And then you have some certain programs which you want to run, they are residing in your memory. What's interesting is, assume that there are 5 programs I want to run, and when I add up their size, it becomes 20 units. And the memory is 10 units, but these programs are 20 units. Then you should be unable to run them, right? Because your memory is smaller than the programs which you are trying to run. But operating system, it does some magic and you are also able to do that. So we'll also talk about that, how that happens. So how can you run the, even you can run a program whose size is more than the size of your memory. And how does that happen? So coming back to the task manager, if you see all these devices listed here, so CPU is one, memory is one, disk is one, network is one, and these are the one things which we are going to study in this course. So whatever piece of hardware do you see here, that is one chapter in your syllabus. Just give me a moment. Okay, so this is your syllabus, the modules, I'm yet to write the name. So if you look at the module 1 here, it is related to the processes or the programs which you are running. So mostly oriented towards CPU, which is the first entity here, as you see. Then coming to the second module, this is called memory management, so which is the second thing operating system looks after. Third module is interesting. So have you ever written two programs which are accessing the same variables? You would have heard of this keyword called extern in C. Can someone tell me what is extern?
We've actually seen that 2 classes ago where Praveen sir was trying to explain how to access functions from another file.
Right? So not just functions, you can also access variables from several files. Assume that you are writing a very big project in C and you have, let's say, 10 files. Out of them, I want 2 files to actually access the same variable. So there you use this keyword extern with the variable. So whenever you have a keyword extern in your C program, it means that that variable is defined in some other file. So somehow both of these files, they are using the same variable. And when two programs try to do that, they try to use the same variable or they try to use the same memory location, blunders can happen, things can go weirdly wrong. So for you, if you are writing something like int I equals to 5, it might be a single statement for you, a single instruction for you. But for your computer, it can be 3 or 4 instructions, as you might have seen in assembly language programs. So those kind of things, they lead to some trouble there. So that's what we are going to look at in this third chapter, which is synchronization between the processes. And the next part of my task manager is disk, which forms your next chapter, which is your how do you access your hard disk drives, how do you access your input output devices, and your last module is for the file system. So we are going to look at how operating system it handles each of these hardware devices. I'll share this syllabus soon with you. I'm yet to do a little bit of editing here. Okay. So coming back, syllabus explained. Okay. Now to understand more about your operating system, just give me a moment. I have to share my screen. Okay. So now to understand the operating system, our first chapter is definitely processes. But before even jumping to that chapter, we need to understand in little bit more detail about the hardware. So you would have studied about hardware in 2 of your previous courses, which is digital logic design and computer architecture. So you can actually go back and revise some of this syllabus from there. However, I'll give you a very small or very intuitive idea in this lecture also. Okay. So what all is your hardware composed of? All of you have answered this question in our previous lecture, right? You said that the parts of a computer, we have CPU, we have memory, we have disks, GPUs, memory buses. Okay, why do we call the wires as buses? Buses are nothing but the wires in my computer, right? So why do we call them buses and not simply wires? So the reason is, if you look at your motherboard, so this is the place where your different kind of buses will run. So I'm not going into too much of details. So there are various kind of system bus. You can have an address bus, you can have a data bus. So if you look at this motherboard, it is so sophisticated and it has so many parts, it looks like a small digital city. So that's why instead of the term wire, we use the term buses. They sort of carry traffic in this small digital city. Okay, so let's look at the parts of computers one by one. So let's come to the CPU or the processor first. So how is a CPU or a processor made? So we have discussed this in our previous lectures that most of the advancement in computer industry, it happened after transistors came because they were very cheap, they were very small. So this is a little bit statistic on transistors which I found online. So the size of a transistor is actually 50 nanometers, which you use in your computer systems. And relatively, if you look at a sheet of paper, it is 100,000 nanometers. So from there, you can make a guess how small a piece of transistor is. And these are the transistors which comprise the entire CPU. Now the question is how, so that again boils down to multiple levels of abstraction. So it started with a transistor. What's a transistor? We discussed it in the previous lecture. So it's a binary switch kind of a thing. So a transistor, it works something like this, like a tap of water. So here, this thing which you look here, we call it the control, and there are 2 more legs. They have some names, I don't remember. Does anyone remember? I think one is emitter and one is collector.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So what happens is this ammeter, it passes electricity, and when your control wire, you pass electricity through it, that basically means it's in one state, electricity is passing through it, your circuit is closed and current flows through here. So when your control is 1, your collector is also 1. And what happens when you make the control 0, this little circuit breaks down here. So whatever is being emitted, it doesn't come across through the collector, so it becomes a 0. So transistor, what is it? If you try to write a truth table for it, the truth table is very simple, right? So if you input 0, your output will be 0. And if you input 1, your output will be 1. That's not a very useful circuit. Now, how does you form a NOT gate? So you do some things with these transistors, you start collecting them, you know, like cells in a human body, they start collecting with each other and form tissues. So similarly, these transistors, you can put many of them together to do different kind of things. So you can actually change both the legs of these transistors and it becomes a NOT gate. So you can form a NOT gate with this one transistor. And then you would have studied about different kind of gates like shown here, OR, NOR, AND, NAND. Can you tell me how many transistors do you need to combine to make an OR gate? Have you done that in practice, any of you, maybe in some of your labs previously? Have you tried designing an OR gate on your own? So you can actually somehow put two transistors together and you can make an OR gate. And that's not very difficult. You basically put one transistor here, one transistor here, and combine their output wire. So anyhow, if current is flowing through any of them, you will get a 1. So if there is 1 on any of the sides, you get a 1 in the output. Even if you don't understand them, that's okay. I am just trying to give you an intuition. Similarly, you can combine two transistors to make a AND gate, and then you can have 3 transistors to make an XOR gate. So all these transistors, they come together and then they make different kinds of gates. And then you would have studied that you can combine gates to make bigger electric circuits. So you can combine these gates to make an adder. Then there are kinds of adders, right? Half adder, full adder, carry look ahead adder. So what are adders? They just help you in adding to binary numbers. So you can give it to binary numbers and you add it. So there is where you can see, you know, a piece of software merging with a piece of hardware. So you give some inputs on these different lines of an integrated circuit, let me call it, and it will give you some output, again in the form of some electric signal. So that's another level of abstraction. So transistors, they combine to form gates, and then you have gates combine to form all these circuits. Okay. And then the thing is, that's why we study Boolean logic, because what we need to do, any kind of thing I want a computer to do, it essentially boils down to these circuits, and the circuits can only take electricity as an input. That's why I need to I need to convert all my data in a 0-1 kind of a format. And that there's where we come to, you know, understanding how do you convert different kind of data into binary. So I hope all of you know how do you convert basic digits to binary, then decimal system to binary, all those things. And then you have different kind of data, not only one. You can have floating point numbers where your decimal digit can float anywhere in your number. So I hope so although for this course, it's not a graded part, you need not remember exactly how to convert this fractional number into a binary number. So I'm just trying to, you know, fit the pieces together. And then you know that all the alphabets which we use, they have some ASCII value. So again, you can convert them to binary. And then there is different kind of electric circuitry which allows you to do computations on all of these. That is the first unit of your CPU, which we call arithmetic and logical unit. So it is nothing but some circuits which are made up of gates. You can pass some input to them and they can give you some output. Okay, now the next question is, this is now understood. We have this unit sitting inside CPU, you give input on some of the pins and then some other pin will give you the output. But the next question is, from where does this input come and where does this output go?
Hardware?
Which hardware? So let's say this is my, let me put my arithmetic and logical unit here. So I know that I can give, so there are some circuits sitting inside this. So maybe this is an adder, this is a multiplier, I don't know. So you can give some input to this adder, you can give some input to this multiplier, and it will give you the output in return. So there are certain questions which are still not answered. So the first one is, from where is it getting all this input? Ultimately that is from the user, but exactly which piece of hardware, as you rightly said, some other hardware, but what is that hardware? That is memory, right? So I have my memory sitting here, and somehow it knows where exactly in the memory is my input. That also we should understand, how does it even know that? And then that output again flows back to the memory. Okay, that's the first thing, first question. And the second question is, how does this unit exactly know which of these circuits to activate? So if I want to add two numbers, it should enable adder. If I want to multiply two numbers, it should work on multiplier. It should, so maybe each of these circuit has some enable line or something. So if you set the enable line 1, it means that the circuit should be working and it should give you some output. But how exactly do we tell that which circuit should work at what point in time? So that is another question. So we'll come back there. So before that, let's understand what this memory is. Since we now know that this processing unit or ALU, it is taking the input from memory. So I sort of see memory like the old days punch card. So previously you were reading the data from punch card and printing it out to a printer. Today you read the data from memory and you also output this data to memory. So what exactly is memory? How does a computer remember things like us? And the answer is again in one of the electric circuit. So can you tell me which is the smallest electric circuit which you have studied which can remember things, which can act as a memory? So we
flip-flops.
Okay, so one, I heard two answers. So one is registers, another is flip-flops. And what is the basic unit of a register or a flip-flop? There is something even before that. So which is the circuit which can remember like 1 bit of data?
Is it a capacitor?
I'm not sure. Capacitor, I'll have to look into it. I have another name for it. Not the another name for capacitor, but according to what I understand, it's a latch. Right? So you actually combine latches and then only you get your flip-flops, right? And again, you get your registers after combining the latch. So if you remember this SR latch here, right? So it allows you to remember the data. So whatever input you give here, right? So this latch remembers it because of some kind of pipelining here, because of some kind of feedback system. So you can go back and read more about it. So the idea is you have these two lines here, write and input lines. If write line is 0, it will keep remembering what was there in it. And if you set this write line to 1, you can change the data and it will keep remembering the data even if you stop flowing the current through it. So as we know, transistor, you cannot use it much to store the data because whatever input you give it, that is the output. So if current stops flowing through the transistor, it forgets. But in latch, if the current stops flowing, basically if your input and write lines become 0, even then it remembers the data. So your memory system, they are entirely made up of latches. Then you are correct that we add up these latches, make flip-flops and registers out of them, and then when we combine these, then we get something called memory cells, and you can then store the values in the memory cells. We'll talk more about it in the next lecture. It's taking more time than what I expected. Okay. So we'll continue from here in the next lecture. Before that, so today we have a lab, right? At what time? It is at 2:35. So correct me if I'm wrong, all of you have lab at the same time, right? From 2:35 to 4:30, or is it sort of broke up in two parts?
No, ma'am, we have it at the same time.
Have it at the same time and only one lab per week, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what we are going to do today is I want you to execute certain commands on the command line interface. Have any of you worked with disk operating system or DOS at some point in time? So today the operating systems which we see and all the kind of work which we do is completely GUI based. We most of the time do not use our terminal and the command line interface. But the idea is that if you use the command line interface, it is much faster than the GUI based way of doing things, because that is again another level of abstraction. Because people, they find it difficult to directly work on the command line interface, they came up with GUI, which will definitely, be slower than the command line based way of doing things. So many times students say, why is like Python slower than C? Have any of you felt that when you write a program in Python, at times it is slower than the same program you write in the language C? Because there is again a level of abstraction. What are the variables which you create in Python? So when you write I equals to 10 in Python, that I there is an object and it belongs to some class, and you don't even know that some object oriented programming is going on there. So whenever you step up at one level of abstraction, things will definitely become slower, because there is something which is working in background for you. So today's lab is all about exploring the command line interface working with bash. Give me a moment, I'll just share the lab document with you here. I'll also email it to you later. So I'm just sending it to you, take a look at it. You can ask me doubts if you have any, because mostly I'll not be available in the lab sessions. TA will be there. So Kapil is our PhD student, he's the TA for the lab. So those of you who are working on Ubuntu, Linux or Mac, you won't have much of a problem. And those of you who are actually running Windows, so you can also run this bash shell on your system with a little bit of installation. So in the lab document which I have prepared, I have kept three ways in which you can work with this bash system. So you can use any of these. So go in the order. So there are three ways. The first one is the easiest. Second is which will take a little more time. Third one is the more sophisticated. So all three of these is working on my system. I have Windows, so I think that at least one of these will work on your system. The file is posted. You can have a look at it and ask me if you have any doubts. If you have no doubts, you can leave the session. Otherwise, you can just explore it. You will get more time to explore this document during your lab session today. Also, let me know when you find the speed of lectures to be less, or if you find the lectures to be fast, let me know.